Thank you for joining this tutorial on FERPA and video recording at Central Oregon Community College. FERPA stands for the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. It is a 1974 federal law that protects the privacy of student education records and applies to all schools that receive program funds from the U.S. Department of Education. A full overview of COCC's FERPA's policies can be found on the college's website. Here you can see the names and links to COCC's three main FERPA policy statements. You can search for them on the college's website by typing these titles into the search box on the COCC homepage. The purpose of this presentation, though, is just to look at the impact of FERPA as it applies to class video recording. We're going to do this through the lens of some real-world scenarios. Hopefully this will provide some context to identify areas of potential non-compliance, as well as tools to ensure that your instructional content meets FERPA requirements and the educational needs of your students. In its simplest form, FERPA is trying to protect student privacy by eliminating the exposure of what is called PII, or Personal Identifiable Information. These include grades, test scores, attendance, and any other information that makes it easy to identify and locate a student. When it comes to video recordings, personal identifiable information is usually revealed by using a person's name, voice, or image. To better understand what that means, let's take a look at a few scenarios that illustrate what does and does not constitute a violation of FERPA protections for students. Okay, the first scenario. My college provides faculty with a variety of apps and software to record lectures and labs for students to view remotely. Does FERPA restrict the type of software that may be used? Not at all. Since FERPA is strictly a privacy rule, it doesn't determine what type of apps or other online recording tools can be used. Now, the more familiar instructors become with online tools, the better prepared they will be to create content that will be in compliance with FERPA. COCC has video recording and editing software such as Camtasia, as well as high-quality webcams and microphones available for faculty recordings. And the best news is that these days, the tools are very user-friendly. And as always, COCC's e-learning staff will be happy to bring you up to speed if your editing chops are a bit rusty. There's also great peer mentoring available from our very tech-savvy faculty. Check with your colleagues. There might be someone in the next cubicle who can help. Okay, scenario 2 is a situation many of you are familiar with. You teach a class using Zoom to record lectures and discussion. During the recording, students are identified by name or seen on camera, or their voice is heard. You are the only other person recorded. The video is then stored on the Canvas server and viewers must authenticate into Canvas to watch. The recording is only available to students who are registered in the class that was recorded. Are there any FERPA issues? In this case, no. It is FERPA compliant to capture student presentations, comments, or personal information in a class and to share the recordings with members of that same class. Course content that does not include any identifiable student information would not involve FERPA at all. Pre-recorded lectures showing only the instructor would all be FERPA compliant and can be distributed through any channel such as YouTube, Vimeo, or Canvas. And now regarding student permissions. In this scenario, because only classmates will see the video, permission is not required from the students to record them and make the video available for review in Canvas. However, COCC policy does require that all students be advised in advance if their classes are going to be recorded. Recordings from one class, however, should not be repurposed for viewing by another class. For example, in this scenario, if you use the same video the following term, with a different group of students, that would be a FERPA violation. All right, this scenario is going to sound very familiar. You teach a class using Zoom to record lectures and discussion. During the recording, students are identified by name, or seen on camera, or their voice is heard. You are the only other person recorded. The video is stored on the Canvas server, and all viewers must authenticate into Canvas to watch. The recording will be available to students in other classes or sections. Is this FERPA compliant? So this was nearly identical to scenario number 2. The only difference is that students from other classes or sections are able to watch the video. And for this reason, scenario number 3 is not FERPA compliant. FERPA restricts the sharing of recordings that identify students to people outside the class that was recorded. If students are identifiable in the recording, The instructor may only post the class recording on that specific class section's password-protected Canvas site. The recording may not be posted on a Canvas shell that is accessible by students in more than a single or cross-listed section. It's also important to note that the video cannot be posted on any platform other than the COCC Canvas site. If students are not identifiable in the recording, instructors may share recorded sessions with multiple sections or on other platforms. By not identifiable, we mean students' names and faces are not visible, or they have been obscured and their names have not been spoken. As long as these parameters are followed, students do not have the right to refuse being recorded. In any case where a class will be recorded, instructors must notify students before the class recording begins. The instructor may just say something like, quote, "This class may be recorded," unquote. These guardrails to protect student privacy do present some challenges when it comes to recording classes. But as is usually the case in video production, there are effective workarounds. Here are a few steps to consider in advance of your recording. In the case of recording with a group in the same room, arrange the seats so that students who are concerned about being recorded are out of camera view. If it's a remote Zoom session, have their camera blanked or an avatar in place of their image. Do not use students' names and avoid any verbal clues that might identify students or their locations. For example, linking a student's name with their voice could be an identifier. A student could also be identified if they have an uncommon name. Although not always possible or desirable, consider pre-recording the instructional presentation with only your voice and image. This will completely eliminate any FERPA concerns. So let's say you were unable to use any preventative strategies to create your video, and now you have a piece of media that is out of FERPA compliance. There's still hope. Let's take a look at a few editing options. This is what is called de-identifying students in FERPA parlance. If you recorded your video in Zoom, the first thing you want to do is export the video as an MP4 video. Take the video file and import it into Camtasia. If you don't have Camtasia already installed, you can get a license from eLearning to install on your school or home computer. In Camtasia, there is a blur effect that can be easily applied over a student's face. The de-identified video can now be uploaded to Kaltura for use as a FERPA-compliant media element in any class. Although instructors will be the primary content creators in online classes, there will be occasions when students will want to make their own recordings. For example, a student in your class may ask to record a lecture using their personal device. Is this FERPA compliant? That depends. Let's take a look at the COCC policy on student recording. It says, and I quote, "Students must consult with the instructor before making any auditory or visual recording of any portion of the class. Recording of class sections will be allowed only with prior permission and within parameters set by the instructor." Unquote. Now, if the student gets permission to record, they still must comply with the FERPA requirement that states recordings are for personal academic use only. The COCC policy goes on to emphasize that, quote, "It is a violation of Oregon state law and FERPA to share or post any information that identifies a student from a class recording," unquote. Another common recording request comes from students with disabilities. Students with a variety of individual challenges can find it difficult to process the lecture content and make cogent written notes at the same time. They may need a recording in order to process the class material thoroughly. Students with disabilities who wish to record a class will need to get a formally approved accommodation from the Services for Students with Disabilities Department and email the approved accommodation to their instructor before the class begins. If an instructor has concerns about allowing a student with an accommodation to record a class or a portion of a class, the instructor should contact the Office of Disability Services to address their concerns. In the case of students without an accommodation, instructors may choose as a general rule not to allow students to record their class or portions of their class. Instructors should indicate that policy on their syllabus. At the start of this video, we talked about how FERPA is all about protecting student privacy and not about limitations on the use of software or other tools. However, there may be security issues with online tools that could lead to privacy breaches. What happens, for example, if a Zoom class is interrupted by an uninvited visitor? Simply put, this is when a person from outside your Zoom class gains unauthorized access to the class and disrupts the session. This gatecrasher usually says or displays something outrageous to upset the students and instructors. Often these interactions are recorded and posted on social media. Disruptive behavior in a class is never acceptable, but in the case of an unwanted visitor, the matter can become a serious violation of student privacy. In most Zoom recordings, the students are identified by a name caption, their video or still image, and often from class dialogue, all conditions for a FERPA violation, as we have already talked about in this video. So what can we do to minimize the opportunity for this kind of behavior at COCC? Well, e-learning has put together a helpful guide on Zoom best practices. This will help faculty to enhance their class security. You can find it by going to the Instructional Resources webpage and clicking on the FERPA for Faculty link. There are a variety of user-friendly options available in Zoom security settings. The selections that faculty choose will depend on the functionality they need in a particular course, or because course content or a teaching modality dictates a particular level of security. Here are a couple of general guidelines to consider. Zoom links are accessed by students logging into their Canvas account. This authentication step provides basic security, but the Zoom links or meeting ID can be copied and shared outside of Canvas. Perhaps another level of authentication is required for access to Zoom classes. Other precautions can include passwords, waiting rooms, or limited sharing options. Check with eLearning to find out more about these and other tips on how to safeguard your Zoom sessions. We hope these scenarios have helped clarify some of the issues around FERPA compliance and provide a useful guide in your online content creation. As you begin to think about next steps, now would be a good time to revisit your video production plan and make any adjustments to bring upcoming content into line with FERPA. And finally, make sure that you give yourself enough time, especially if you have to do any editing to make your videos FERPA compliant and have them available on schedule for your students. It may seem like a heavy lift, but as always, if you need any assistance, the e-learning department is here to help. Whether it's training or simply a bit of troubleshooting, we are here to assist with all your pre-production, production, and post-production needs. Thanks for watching.